Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay guys, this is the big one. The one I've been building up to, the one I am so excited about. Y'all be knowing here on my channel, I love me an end of the year list. I love forcing myself to pick my very favorites and, ruthlessly cut out the ones I still really loved but didn't quite make, I love it. So this is the big one. This is my best books of 2019. I should mention this isn't the best releases of 2019. If you are interested in that, I believe probably next week, there will be a video of me force ranking every 2019 book I read, books that came out in 2019. This is just my best list for books that I read in 2019. So I am gonna try not to talk too much about each individual book because I have been doing all of these other list videos for each of the genres that I read in. And just for context, I read usually between 200 and 300 books a year. That's part of why I feel it merits having a bunch of these best of the year lists, because if I just did a top 10 proportionally, that would be so few, and I just can't quite do that to myself. So anyway, enough of my yapping. Basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run through this top 10 list, and I'm gonna try to put most of my commentary towards why these books are ranked thusly. So with that being said, let's get into it. So number 10 is kind of an interesting pick, and I talked a little bit about this during my nonfiction best and worst of the year list video, but I decided to put Catch and Kill and She Said as sister picks because individually those books were 4 stars, but the combined experience of reading them back to back, because these are also books that came out pretty much at the same time, was a 5-star reading experience for me. So it's a little bit of a cheat, but whatever, we're just gonna roll with it. So it did edge out because it was Bad Blood. And then I really thought about it and I was like, no, Bad Blood is not my number 10. That experience, that reading experience of Catch and Kill plus She Said back to back was just a 5-star experience for me. So it has to make this list. It just does, it has to. So I did put it though at the bottom for that reason, because individually these were 4-star books, but they are excellent. So interesting, and together paint just a really fascinating picture of journalism and of a particular, I guess really true crime incident that there was a lot of investigative journalism around. And I would also highly recommend audio for both. I thought that especially Ronan and Farrow did a great job reading Catch and Kill, but they work really well as audio, and yeah, I just recommend them both together. Why pick one when you could read 2? Number 9, you guys might be surprised to see this where it is, only because Ilona Andrews is my favorite currently writing author. Y'all know I'm an absolute sucker for their book. So you might have thought that this was going to be a little bit higher, but I will tell you that while I really love this book, I gave it 4.5 stars, one of my favorite books of the year. Obviously it's making this list. I will say I put this and then Diamond Fire because that was the prequel, the little bridging novella. While I really love this, I wouldn't say I liked it as much. I didn't love it more than I loved books in the trilogy previous to this one. So if you don't know, this is in the Hidden Legacy series, and there was an original trilogy. There was that bridging novella of Diamond Fire, and then this is the first book in a new trilogy. And I would say, I'll take that back. I probably like this about as much as I like the first book in the first trilogy, which was called Burn for Me. So I will say that I probably like both of those the same, and I gave both of them 4.5 stars. So because this wasn't an all-time favorite Ilona Andrews, and that's a high bar to be fair, but I decided that there were other books that I was probably more excited about that I needed to put a little bit higher. So I have this at number 9 and I just loved it. Ilona Andrews, I'm such a fangirl for them, but this is at number 9 and I am so hype for the next one that will come out, I think, in August of next year. Just realized we have a nice little run here of fantasy, because if I didn't mention it, Hidden Legacy is an urban fantasy with a lot of romance elements in it. This, Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence, and then I'll also append Holy Sister and Bound, which was a novella. These are high fantasy. So I read Red Sister at the very end of 2018. Then I read Grey Sister and Bound at the very beginning of 2019. And I had an arc for Holy Sister, which is the final book in that trilogy. And I read that right before it came out. Of them, Grey Sister is definitely my favorite, but I gave both Grey Sister and the novella Bound 4.5 stars. And this is one where the whole of the series is greater than the sum of its parts, because I would call the whole series a 5-star trilogy for me. And for me, a 5-star, if you don't know, is an all-time favorite book. A 4.5 star is a favorite of the year. 5 stars, an all-time favorite book. I would say that the series is a 5-star book, and I think if I had read Red Sister in 2019, this would be a little higher up on the list, but since I didn't technically read the whole series this year, I'm gonna put it here at number 8 because this is the kind of high fantasy I really love, where the world building is super interesting to me. It feels well thought out, but it's not, I always kind of say masturbatory. Like there are some fantasy worlds where I just really feel like the author is far more interested in showing off how much they've thought about their world than telling a good story. I don't think this does that. It has enough of a world set up that it's interesting and feels like fully lived in, and it's a world that's driving interesting conflict. That to me is the biggest point. It's also a very character-driven series, and I am somebody for fantasy who tends to really like series that are very character-driven as opposed to plot-driven. I mean, there's plenty of plot in here, don't get me wrong, but to me, it's the characters that stand out. I love all of these badass warrior nuns who are like just taking no prisoners. They have zero time for your nonsense, and it's just so good. It's so good. This is, like I said, my favorite. Grey Sister, which is the middle one, is my favorite one in the series, and I really love how it picks up from the previous book, and I love how it ends. It's just a very successful second book, and yeah, it's just super, super good. Okay, and then at number 7, we have Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse alongside Storm of Locusts, because I did read both of them this year. But the reason I put this above those other fantasies I was just mentioning, and looking at my list, this is my top fantasy pick of the year, because it's near future post-apocalyptic, but part of the post-apocalyptic is that the gods are back. So there's magic. So I feel like this is like urban fantasy is kind of how this reads to me. So we'll go with that. We're going to call it fantasy. And the reason I put it as my top pick among those 3 we just talked about is that I just feel like in terms of like a new voice who has interesting things to say, very strong writing in terms of just like on a technical level. I think Rebecca Roanhorse's writing is very, very good. Very interesting, well thought out characters who remind me a lot of kind of typical urban fantasy, you know, stereotypes or character types, but they all have like a little twist to them in a way that makes it more interesting. And the fact that she is drawing on indigenous culture to drive her fantasy world in terms of its magic, I think just works super well. It's different, it's fresh, like this is what we want. So just in terms of like proficiency and newness and freshness and a series I'm like super pumped to keep reading in, I just decided this one had to be at the top for fantasies. So that is number 7, and we will have one more appearance of, you know, sort of speculative fiction on this list, but for now we will transition back to nonfiction real quick. Okay, so number 6, we're gonna go with The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, Life After Warming. So this is basically a nonfiction book that is gaming out what would happen to our planet for each degree of warming Celsius that we reach, because his whole point is like, hey, all of the discourse is focused around like, oh, we can't get to 2 degrees warming. And he's like, girl, it could get so much worse, and let me show you what will happen if it does. And his whole point is that part of what he had uncovered as a part of his reporting for the original piece that I believe it ran in either the New Yorker or New York Magazine, something like that, was just like how much of a softball scientists have been on how bad things can get. And his whole point, I think, basically is like, hey, if you don't know what worst case scenario is, you don't feel motivated to act. And the reason I put this so high up on the list is because this really has, this got me into reading several books about the environment, ways that individuals can contribute to reducing climate change, as well as like what kind of collective action is needed. And like this has actually changed some of my consumerism habits. Like I put this high up on the list because this actually has impacted my life. So I felt like it belonged in number 6, even if it didn't end up being like as crazily life impacting as other nonfiction I've read. It really has like sent me down a journey of reading more about that topic and thinking more about it. Okay, number 5 is my favorite arc that I read for 2019, my favorite romance of the year. And I do just want to pause at this moment and say, even though there's only one like true romance on this list, if I was going to give you like a MVP of genre for me this year, it would be romance. I feel like there were some really good books I read in that genre this year. Just was a genre I was reading a lot of things that really like revved my engines, and that was the list that was hardest to make in terms of best ofs, just because I had a lot of books that I just really, really loved in that genre. So just a side note, there's only one romance pick on here, but it's my favorite, and it was a good genre for me this year. So number 5 is the Austen Playbook by Lucy Parker. And the only reason it's not higher is basically just because of the competition that it has for those top 4 slots. Like, there's some like all-time favorite books here in the top. Like, we're in that territory of like, these are some of my all-time favorite books. And I think in terms of just like memorableness or like execution difficulty, like sticking the landing, I had to pick some other ones a little higher. But this is almost sort of like a default ranking for this book because I just think it's an excellent version of contemporary romance, at least as I personally like it. Had a ton of elements I really enjoyed. And yeah, it's just, there was some stiff competition once we get to this part of the list. So that is why it has cracked the top 5, but it is not higher up in the top 5. Okay, number 4 is my favorite nonfiction pick of the year. And again, this is sort of like what I was just saying about the Austen Playbook, where No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. This is a book that basically isn't higher just by the fact that there's some things that are coming up from some of my all-time favorite writers and series. So I just couldn't quite get it into the top 3. But at number 4, this one is just so good. Definitely my favorite nonfiction pick of the year. My favorite 2019 release that I read this year. Again, you'll be seeing the full rundown of that, I think, next week. But spoilers, this is my favorite 2019 release as of this filming. And I just think that it's an excellent version of what it is doing, which is a little bit of true crime, a lot of like kind of sociological analysis and sort of like reportage with individuals, telling the story and the picture of what cycle of domestic abuse does to the people caught up in it, how it is reflected in our society writ large. It's just a fantastic book. I've seen it on, I think it's been getting nominated for some prizes, and I think that it's been on some big end of the year lists, which makes me happy. So I think it's getting some love, but it's fantastic, and I just very highly recommend it. Okay, we're in the top 3, and you guys, I just want you to know, in this moment, I'm still not sure which one I'm gonna tell you is number 1 and which one is number 2. I do know which one is number 3, and that is a book from my all-time favorite writer, my new favorite book in the Miss Marple series, a book that just embodies a lot of the things that I love about Agatha Christie, and that is Sleeping Murder. It had to be this high up because this is a top 10 Agatha Christie for me, so like definitionally it had to be in the top 3 for this year. I just had such a good time reading this. This gave me all of the feels that I love from a really good Agatha Christie. It just really worked for me, and yeah, she's my all-time favorite author, so this was a 5-star book from my all-time favorite author, so it just had to be this high up on the list. Yeah, just love the hell out of this one. Okay guys, I'm in my top 2 and I'm so conflicted right now because I am torn between what I think is a perfect book of its kind that I loved and what was probably my favorite reading experience of the year. Oh, I don't know which one to pick. I'm so, okay, you guys, I'm gonna say fuck it and I'm gonna follow my heart. So number 2, and a change from what I wrote down, is All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is a perfect book. It is it's novella. It's really a novella. I should clarify. It's a perfect novella. It has exactly the right amount of plot in it. It has no dragging. The characters in such a short amount of time are just so memorable. Murderbot, oh, so good. And it is just super interesting world building, and the plot is a mystery, so I love that. So it's sci-fi that is incredibly human, and that is the best sci-fi, is ones, even when it's hard sci-fi like this, where there's just like that real human connection still to what's going on. So it is a perfect book. It's probably the one I should say is my favorite of the year, but I am gonna follow my heart, guys. So let's get to number 1. Number 1 is just gonna have to be Treachery and Death by J.D. Robb. I have Echoes in Death here to sort of represent it, and I gave this one 4.5 stars, I should say. I also gave Promises in Death 4.5 stars. But guys, Treachery and Death is the only 5-star book in the In Death series for me. I read it this year, and the In Death series is an all-time favorite series, and it was unquestionably, that binge of the In Death series was my favorite reading experience of the year. I had so much fun getting through those books. I just like the binge part of it really hit me in a time where I needed it. I was having like super anxious episode there for a few months, and just having them as a comfort read, these just great murder mysteries with like a sci-fi element thrown in because it's near future, and a romance element thrown in, and just like fantastic characters, fantastic character dynamics. I just love it. And if I'm just following my heart, that was my favorite reading experience of the year. So that has to be at the top. And I feel good about that decision. Even though that was sort of an audible, change things up, I think that was the right call. So that was my favorite book of the year, Treachery and Death. Loud and proud, favorite book of the year. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end. Yeah, guys, those were my best books of 2019 that I read. I am gonna still have a few more rounding up 2019 videos and launching into 2020 in terms of books that I want to read in 2020, some more stats on my 2019 reading. But this is really like the crown jewel of my 2019 wrap up. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely feel free to let me know what your best book was for 2019, or if you have any thoughts about the ones that I mentioned. And yeah, I'm a little sad that we're at the end of the best of list because you guys know I love these, but yeah, this is the end. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you guys are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.